What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors comes face to face with a talk show host who crosses every line imaginable? You won't believe what unfolds when Samuel L. Jackson sits down for what was supposed to be a routine interview, only to witness the most shocking display of disrespect in late-night television history. This isn't just another celebrity spat. This is a masterclass in how quickly things can spiral completely out of control when egos collide and professionalism goes out the window. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when Jackson finally reaches his breaking point. Last night's episode started like any other. The studio audience was buzzing with excitement as Samuel L. Jackson, the legendary actor known for his commanding presence and zero tolerance for nonsense, made his entrance. Dressed in his signature casual, cool style, Jackson walked onto the set with that familiar, confident stride that has carried him through decades of iconic performances. The audience erupted in applause. They knew they were in for something special. But from the very first moment Jackson settled into the guest chair, something felt different. There was an underlying tension in the air that even the most casual viewer could sense. Kimmel's opening remarks carried an edge that seemed more pointed than his usual playful banter. Instead of the warm welcome that guests typically receive, there was an almost confrontational energy emanating from the host's desk. "So, Samuel," Kimmel began with that trademark smirk that his critics know all too well, "I have to ask about some of your recent comments regarding the film industry." The way he phrased it wasn't just casual conversation, it was loaded with implications. Jackson's eyebrows raised slightly, a subtle sign that those familiar with his interviews know means he's already assessing the situation. The veteran actor leaned back in his chair, his expression remaining composed, but his eyes sharpening with focus. "Which comments are you referring to specifically?" Jackson asked, his voice carrying that measured tone that suggests he's not about to be led into any traps. The audience could feel the shift in energy. This wasn't going to be the light-hearted chat they were expecting. Kimmel's response revealed his true intentions. Rather than addressing Jackson's question directly, he launched into what could only be described as a calculated attack disguised as humor. "Well, you've been pretty vocal about diversity in Hollywood, haven't you? Some might say you've been a bit aggressive about it." The pause before aggressive was deliberate, designed to provoke. Jackson's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Anyone who knows the actor understands that he doesn't back down from important conversations, especially when they involve issues he's passionate about. "Aggressive?" he repeated, his voice carrying a dangerous calm that should have been Kimmel's first warning to change course. "I think you need to be more specific about what you mean by that." But instead of recognizing the warning signs, Kimmel doubled down. He pulled out a stack of papers, clearly prepared ammunition for this confrontation. "I've got some quotes here," he said with obvious satisfaction, completely oblivious to the storm he was about to unleash. The studio audience began to sense that something was seriously wrong. This wasn't the playful back and forth they were used to seeing. Jackson sat forward slightly, his entire demeanor shifting from casual guest to someone who was rapidly losing patience with the direction of this interview. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. His shoulders squared, his gaze intensified, and that famous Jackson intensity began to surface. What Kimmel apparently failed to realize was that he wasn't dealing with just any celebrity guest who would smile and play along with whatever game he had planned. As Kimmel continued to read from his prepared notes, seemingly intent on cornering Jackson into some kind of defensive position, the tension in the studio became palpable. The audience members were no longer laughing at Kimmel's attempts at humor. Instead, they were watching with growing discomfort as their host systematically dismantled what should have been a respectful interview. But what happened next would change everything. And what Kimmel was about to discover was that Samuel L. Jackson wasn't just going to sit there and take it. The moment of truth arrived when Kimmel made the fatal mistake of questioning Jackson's authenticity as an advocate for change in Hollywood. "Come on, Samuel," he said with that condescending tone that was about to cost him dearly. "Isn't this whole diversity crusade just good PR for you? I mean, let's be honest here." The words hung in the air like a lit fuse, and everyone in that studio knew something explosive was about to happen. Jackson's response was immediate and devastating. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The legendary actor simply fixed Kimmel with that steely gaze that has intimidated characters on screen for decades and said, "Excuse me?" The two words carried more weight than a full paragraph of threats. The studio fell dead silent. Even the cameras seemed to sense the gravity of what was unfolding. Kimmel, either completely oblivious to the danger he was in or foolishly believing he could push further, actually doubled down on his attack. "I'm just saying, you've made a pretty good career out of playing the angry black man, haven't you? Maybe this is just another performance." The collective gasp from the audience was audible. Several people could be heard shifting uncomfortably in their seats, and you could practically feel the production team behind the cameras holding their breath. What followed was a masterclass in controlled fury. Jackson leaned forward, his voice dropping to that low, dangerous register that movie audiences know signals serious trouble. "Let me make something very clear to you right now," he began, each word measured and deliberate. "You don't know me. You don't know my struggle. And you sure as hell don't get to sit there and minimize my experiences or my advocacy because it makes for what you think is good television." The power dynamic in the room had completely shifted. Kimmel, who moments before had been smugly orchestrating what he thought was clever, provocative television, suddenly found himself on the receiving end of one of the most intimidating presences in Hollywood. His confidence began to visibly crumble as Jackson continued his measured but devastating response. "You think this is a game?" Jackson continued, his intensity building with each sentence. "You think fighting for representation and equality in this industry is some kind of publicity stunt? You're sitting there with your comfortable little desk and your comfortable little audience, making jokes about issues that have real impact on real people's lives and careers." The studio audience was completely silent now, watching this confrontation unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a reckoning. Kimmel's usual quick wit seemed to have abandoned him entirely as he faced the full force of Jackson's righteous anger. But Kimmel's next move would prove to be the point of no return. Instead of backing down or attempting to defuse the situation, he made the catastrophic decision to interrupt Jackson mid-sentence. "Look, I think you're being a little sensitive here," he began. But he never got to finish that thought. Jackson's hand came down on the arm of his chair with enough force to make everyone in the studio jump. "Sensitive?" The word came out like a bullet. "You want to see sensitive? You just crossed a line that you can't uncross, and now you're about to find out exactly what happens when you disrespect the wrong person on national television." The transformation was complete. The composed, professional Samuel L. Jackson, who had walked onto that stage, had been replaced by someone who was done playing games. His eyes blazed with an intensity that made everyone in that studio understand they were witnessing something unprecedented in late-night television history. What none of them knew was that this was just the beginning, and Kimmel's night was about to get infinitely worse. The breaking point came when Kimmel, in a desperate attempt to regain control of his own show, made the unforgivable mistake of trying to cut Jackson off entirely. Okay, let's just move on to something else," he said, waving his hand dismissively as if Jackson's anger was nothing more than an inconvenience to his programming schedule. That gesture, that casual, disrespectful wave of his hand, was the match that lit the dynamite. Jackson stood up. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with the slow, deliberate movement of someone who had reached the absolute limit of their patience. The studio audience collectively held their breath as this Hollywood legend rose to his full height, towering over Kimmel's desk with a presence that filled the entire studio. "Sit down, Samuel. We're not done here," Kimmel said. but his voice cracked slightly, betraying the fear that was beginning to creep into his consciousness. "Oh, we're done," Jackson replied, his voice carrying the kind of finality that left no room for negotiation. "We're more than done. What we are now is me about to educate you on exactly why you don't disrespect people who've earned their place in this industry through decades of hard work and real struggle." The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of what was rapidly becoming the most explosive confrontation in late-night television history. Jackson began to pace, his movements controlled but predatory, like a lion circling its prey. "You want to know what's really happening here?" he continued, his voice rising for the first time. "You're sitting there thinking you can bait me, provoke me, get me to lose my temper so you can have your viral moment. But what you don't understand is that I've been dealing with people like you my entire career." Kimmel's face had gone pale. The smug confidence that had carried him through the first part of the interview had completely evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization that he had miscalculated catastrophically. "Samuel, I think there's been a misunderstanding." He tried to interject, but Jackson wasn't having it. "Misunderstanding?" Jackson's laugh was harsh and bitter. "The only misunderstanding here is you thinking you could sit behind that desk and treat me like some kind of dancing monkey for your entertainment. You crossed every line of professional respect, and now you want to call it a misunderstanding?" The studio audience was completely transfixed. Many were recording on their phones, instinctively knowing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. The production crew behind the cameras were frantically trying to figure out whether to keep rolling or cut to commercial, but nobody wanted to be the one to make that call. Jackson moved closer to Kimmel's desk, his presence so commanding that the host actually pushed his chair back slightly. "Let me tell you something about respect," Jackson continued, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper that somehow carried more threat than any shout could. "Respect isn't something you get because you have a television show. Respect is something you earn by treating people with dignity, especially when they're guests in your house." The personal nature of the attack was becoming clear to everyone watching. This wasn't just about the interview anymore. This was about years of frustration with entitled hosts who thought their platform gave them the right to demean their guests for entertainment value. Jackson was speaking not just for himself, but for every celebrity who had ever been disrespected on a talk show stage. Kimmel made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Look, if I offended you, that wasn't my intention." But Jackson cut him off with a gesture that was both dismissive and final. "Your intention?" Jackson's voice rose to a level that made everyone in the studio sit up straighter. "Your intention was to humiliate me on national television for ratings. Your intention was to reduce my advocacy and my career to nothing more than a punchline for your monologue. Well, congratulations, Jimmy. You got your viral moment, but it's not going to be the one you wanted." The tension had reached a fever pitch. Jackson stood there dominating the stage with nothing but his presence and his righteous anger, while Kimmel sat frozen behind his desk, finally understanding that he had awakened a force he couldn't control. The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the cameras, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. What happened next would end Jimmy Kimmel's night in the most spectacular fashion possible. Jackson took one final step toward Kimmel's desk, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute finality. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Jimmy? You had the opportunity to have a meaningful conversation with someone who's been in this industry for decades, someone who's seen real change happen and fought for it. Instead, you chose to turn it into a circus act." The studio was so silent that the sound of Jackson removing his microphone seemed to echo through the entire space. He held it up, looking at it for a moment as if considering his next words carefully. "This conversation is over," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the studio without any amplification needed. "And so is my time on this show." What followed was the most devastating exit in talk show history. Jackson didn't storm off in anger. That would have been too easy, too predictable. Instead, he turned to address the studio audience directly, completely bypassing Kimmel as if the host had ceased to exist entirely. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice now warm and respectful as he spoke to the people who had come to see a show, "I apologize that you had to witness this display of unprofessionalism. You deserved better entertainment tonight." The audience erupted in applause. Not the polite, measured applause of a typical talk show, but genuine, thunderous appreciation for Jackson's dignity in the face of Kimmel's disrespect. Several audience members stood up, and within seconds most of the studio was on their feet, giving Jackson a standing ovation while Kimmel sat frozen at his desk, realizing that his own audience was openly rejecting him in favor of his guest. Jackson acknowledged the applause with a gracious nod, then delivered his final blow. He turned back to Kimmel, who was still sitting there in stunned silence, and said with devastating calm, "Jimmy, you've got a platform that reaches millions of people. Maybe next time, try using it to build people up instead of tearing them down. That's what real entertainers do." With that, Jackson placed his microphone on Kimmel's desk with deliberate care, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the exit. But he wasn't done yet. As he reached the edge of the stage, he paused and delivered one last observation that would be quoted for years to come. "Respect isn't something you can script, and class isn't something you can fake. Tonight, America saw the difference." The cameras captured every second as Jackson walked off the stage with his head held high, leaving behind a studio full of stunned silence and one completely humiliated talk show host. Kimmel sat there for what felt like an eternity, his face flushed with embarrassment, unable to form words as his production team scrambled to figure out how to fill the remaining time. The aftermath was immediate and brutal. Social media exploded, with clips of the confrontation, with overwhelming support for Jackson and harsh criticism for Kimmel's behavior. The hashtag #RespectSamuelJackson began trending within hours, accompanied by countless posts praising the actor's dignity and condemning the host's unprofessional conduct. But the real impact went far beyond social media buzz. The incident sparked a broader conversation about the responsibility that comes with hosting a national platform and the importance of treating guests with basic human dignity. Television executives took notice. Entertainment journalists wrote scathing reviews, and other celebrities began speaking out about their own experiences with disrespectful interviews. Kimmel's ratings plummeted in the following weeks as viewers turned away from his show in droves. The incident had revealed something ugly about his approach to celebrity guests, and audiences were no longer willing to overlook it for the sake of entertainment. His attempts to address the controversy only made things worse, as his apologies came across as hollow and self-serving rather than genuine. Meanwhile, Jackson's stock in Hollywood rose even higher. His handling of the situation was praised by colleagues and fans alike as a masterclass in maintaining dignity under pressure. He had shown that it was possible to stand up to disrespect, without losing one's composure or stooping to the level of those who would tear you down. The incident became a turning point in late-night television, forcing hosts across the industry to examine their own interviewing practices and consider whether their pursuit of viral moments was worth sacrificing basic respect and professionalism. It highlighted the importance of treating guests as human beings rather than content to be exploited for ratings. In the end, what was supposed to be Jimmy Kimmel's moment of manufactured controversy became Samuel L. Jackson's triumph of character over cynicism, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect is simply refusing to accept it. The confrontation reminded everyone watching that true entertainment comes from genuine connection and mutual respect, not from cheap shots and manufactured drama. The night Jimmy Kimmel thought he could break Samuel L. Jackson became the night Samuel L. Jackson broke Jimmy Kimmel instead.